Dear Prime Minister, Your Excellencies, members of the Turkish delegation, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Körber Foundation, I would like to extend a warm welcome to you, Prime Minister Davutoğlu. As Professor Davutoğlu, this is not your first time in Berlin. However, as Prime Minister of Turkey, this is your first visit to the German capital. We are honored to be part of your inaugural visit. I would like to take this opportunity to wish you all a happy and healthy new year. I must admit that this wish does not roll off the tongue easily. 2015 began with a shock. The attack on Charlie Hebdo's editorial office did not only hit France in the heart, but everyone believing in freedom, tolerance, and humanity. Along with thousands of Parisians, Christians, Jews, Muslims, atheists, and more than 40 heads of state and government, you, Prime Minister, participated in yesterday's Republican March in Paris. Now is the time to show that we all, regardless of our religious, political, or social background, stand united for diversity, freedom, and peace. Nous sommes tous Charlie. 2015 is a year in which Turkey will also be faced with decisive choices with respect to domestic politics, its regional neighborhood, and on the international stage. We are delighted that you, Prime Minister, have accepted our invitation so early in the new year to illuminate the foreign policy challenges faced by your country and to engage in discussion with our guests. Ladies and gentlemen, for over 50 years, Körber Foundation has worked to promote international understanding. In the spirit of our founder, Kurt Körber, we stand for a dialogue that helps to overcome national, political, and religious borders, and for open, sometimes uncomfortable, but always respectful discussion. Talking with another, not about one another, as Körber repeatedly called for. For many years, we have placed special focus on the dialogue with Turkey, this important country in the interface, some would say fault line, between Europe and Asia, between Orient and Occident, between tradition and modernity. We have had the opportunity to welcome you personally, Prime Minister, on a number of occasions. At the 136th Bergedorf Roundtable in Istanbul in 2007, within the framework of a political breakfast in our Berlin office in 2009, as well as at the 2012 Munich Young Leaders meeting on the margins of the Munich Security Conference. Prime Minister, at the Bergedorf Roundtable in Istanbul nearly 7 years ago, at the time in your capacity as the foreign policy advisor to your predecessor in office, Mr. Erdogan, you presented your vision for the Middle East in 2015. It was based on 3 fundamental principles which have lost none of their validity, even though, in light of the dramatic developments in the region, they now appear like an ideal scenario rather than a description of reality. Firstly, you've said, the Middle East of the year 2015 requires an effective political dialogue between all countries of the region. How true. However, even in the light of the threat from the Islamic State, which affects all regional partners and players, such a comprehensive dialogue appears as far off as ever. The The structural preconditions are lacking, but frequently also the political will of the relevant actors. Secondly, diversity is the litmus test for peaceful, multicultural societies, you said. I agree with you on this point too. However, the distressing reality of the year 2015 looks different. The colorful ethnic, religious, and cultural mosaic of the Middle East threatens to break apart. And thirdly, mutual economic dependency forms the basis for peace in the region, you said. In light of our experience with the process of European integration, again I would say you are right. However, today, in large parts of the Middle East, the security situation is so precarious that solid economic relations, let alone greater economic integration, are now virtually impossible. As a consequence of this geographical location, Turkey is highly exposed to the crisis in the region. However, for us Europeans, even before the steady increase in the number of refugees entering Europe, looking the other way has never been an option. We are also being increasingly affected by the shock waves from the conflicts in the Middle East. Prime Minister, it is no secret when I state that many people in Europe are following aspects of Turkey's regional policy as well as its internal political course with a sense of unease. The approach to dissenting voices and political opposition, the implementation of checks and balances, as well as the relationship between religion and politics are a matter of concern to many. However, despite all differences of opinion, there is no alternative to a common approach when it comes to facing the security challenges in the Middle East. Prime Minister, we are looking forward to exploring these and other questions with you and would like to express our warm thanks for your willingness to address our questions in conclusion to your speech, my colleague Thomas Paulsen. Since the beginning of this year, my colleague in the Executive Board of Körber Foundation will moderate the discussion. I would like to take this opportunity to warmly thank the Turkish Embassy, above all Ambassador Kasleoğlu, for the excellent cooperation, not just with respect to the organization of this event, but for the excellent and trusting cooperation over past years. We look forward to continuing this. And naturally, I would like to thank all of you, ladies and gentlemen, for finding the time to be here today and take great pleasure in welcoming you as our guests. Prime Minister Davutoğlu, I would now ask you to take the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Remaya, distinguished guests. It is again a great honor for me to be at Körber Foundation. You remembered me the 2007 meeting in Istanbul, and 2009 after I became Minister of Foreign Affairs in May. In June I gave another lecture here, and in 2012 we had an excellent meeting in Munich with young leaders, Körber Foundation's Young Leaders Forum. Again, I am very happy and proud of being with you today. Yesterday we were in Paris for a very sad occasion. Usually people go to Paris for happy occasions, but this time it was a sad occasion for not only for French people, but for all humanity and for all Europeans. And we had a very strong message to the world that we are all united for humanity, for freedom, for stability, and more important, for peace and multiculturalism in our continent and in the world. Now, when we look at all these events recently. Of course, I will come to your question. I will make a comparison of 2007 and today, 2015. In one of my another analysis last year, I said that in post-Cold War there were 4 earthquakes. 3 earthquakes, but one of them had twofold. Yesterday, I think the experience what we faced in France was a challenge out of all these earthquakes. Earthquake is a good analogy because as Turkey, we know earthquake very well. Before the earthquake, we have a situation. After the earthquake, you have another situation you have to respond. The first biggest earthquake in post-Cold War was in 1991 after the collapse of Soviet Union. This was a geopolitical earthquake in both cases. The geopolitical structure of Cold War has disappeared. And all of us at that time, we were worried what will be happen in next decade. Second earthquake was in 2001, after 10 years, 12th September. This was a security earthquake. The concept of security has changed, and there was a shift of paradigm about relations between cultural diversifications and security concerns. And then we had, like in the first earthquake, we had Bosnian War, Kosovo War. After the second earthquake, we have war in Afghanistan and intervention to Iraq. Third earthquake was economic earthquake in 2008, global economic earthquake, and followed by a socio-political earthquake around Mediterranean regarding after the Arab Spring in 2011. When we make an analysis, always we have to see the international context, how it is changing. Yes, we have to have ideals, norms, but at the same time, we have to respond to these challenges in a very efficient way. Here, in last years, in fact, but more important in last months, now we realize that these earthquakes are still continuing. The aftershocks of earthquakes continue. For example, in 1991, after Bosnian War, after war in Kosovo, after integration of Balkan nations and also Central European, Eastern European nations to NATO and EU, we were expecting a stability in the previous belt, geopolitical belt, which divided East and West, socialist and capitalist bloc, etc. But the crisis in Ukraine reminded us that geopolitical earthquake is not over. We may face real challenges, despite of the fact that many Eastern European countries are member of EU today. So the aftershocks may threaten the international stability anytime. We had frozen conflicts from this geopolitical earthquake in Nagorno-Karabakh, in Azerbaijan, Armenian issue, Abkhazia, Georgian issue, which erupted again in 2008, and even in Bosnia-Herzegovina, still there is a frozen situation where there is a need of a close attention for the stability of all of us. Ukrainian crisis in that sense was an alarming call for everybody. That geopolitical belt is still very sensitive to respond. Second, after 12th of September, war against 9/11, in 2001, 9/11 issue, we had a new security concept. And there was a fight against terror in Afghanistan, which lasted more than 10 years now, and Turkey was part of it, of course, with the coalition. But the terrorist threat is still valid everywhere, including Paris and Istanbul, or in other places. We had a terrorist attack before in Istanbul, one day before Paris. And the economic crisis created a new atmosphere in Europe and in world economy, so that many masses, because of this economic situation, has been frustrated, and rise of extremist approaches in European politics, right-wing approaches, as well as in many countries there are certain political trends now, which is not traditional, like Syria in Greece or in many other countries. There are some new political trends which responded to these economic challenges. So, and after Arab Spring in 2011, together with this global crisis, has shaken all the basic stones in the international arena. And in 2011, if you ask this question to anyone in the Middle East, there was a huge hope for the future. Those young people in Tahrir Square, or in Homs in Syria, or in Libya, they requested the same things, like in 1990s in Bosnia-Herzegovina, Romania, or Poland. So now we are facing a much bigger comprehensive challenge in international arena, composed of all these consequences of the first geopolitical earthquake in 1991, second 9/11 security earthquake, economic earthquake of unemployment is still continuing, and Arab Spring. Yes, in 2007, what I described was political vision of Turkey, what we wanted to achieve. Because in that year, 1 year before economic crisis and 3-4 years before Arab Spring, there was a Turkish vision towards the region. That's what we wanted to achieve. I will give you 2 examples. It would have been very much different if, in 2008, Turkish mediation between Syria and Israel would have been successful. In 2008 December, after 2-3 years, very discreet diplomacy, when we had that meeting in Istanbul, we had already started that mediation efforts. But 2 days before the final agreement, Israel has attacked Gaza and killed hundreds of people in the first day, and all this process has stopped. Today, sometimes I am thinking, if there was a peace between Syria and Israel at that time, what would have happened to the situation in the region? Second example, in 2010, again, through Turkish and Brazilian mediation, there was a deal with Iranian government administration at that time regarding nuclear issue, which was not well received by international community. You could imagine now if we had such a deal being achieved, if that agreement, which was much better than today's P5+1 Iran talks, if that would have been accepted, what would have this situation in the region? So all of us, we have to work for a vision. Whether you can achieve that vision or not will not be depending on you only, but everywhere we will continue to follow, in all these issues, a normative, visionary approach. Today around Turkey, there are at least 7-8 countries, because of all these earthquakes, or later, there are failing states, unfortunately. And despite of this, we will have to work for a new Middle East, for a new Balkans, for a new Caucasia. It is up to you how to define your objectives. In this sense, now it is time to make an assessment and to work together in all these subjects. Turkey is right at the center of all these events. Last year, after Ukrainian crisis, in a meeting of EU ministers, there was a question how to interpret Ukrainian crisis, Syrian crisis, and many other potential crises around us. Either we will be trapped and become slave of these crises, or we will make a new initiative how to contain this crisis and how to create a new atmosphere for the future. Here, I can categorize 3 categories of states or leaders, whatever you can call. One, those countries who have a vision and governability, administrative capacity. Second category, those countries who do not have a new vision, but there is
at least a stable government, and there are countries which do not have a vision, also do not have a capacity of government. Unfortunately, today, in international framework, there are so many countries where these challenges not being faced properly, and the governments in the capital cannot control either all the regions of the country or not able to govern properly, like Syria, like Iraq, like Ukraine, not because of their mistakes or others, but at least there is not full control of the state on the territories. How to respond to these challenges is not only our responsibility, but the responsibility of all these state structures as well as international organizations. What should be our objective? Yes, in 2007, we were trying to achieve a new Middle East based on political dialogue. And we had good relations with all the political leaders to achieve this, including Syria and Israel, to make a peace between two sides, or in Lebanon, or in Iraq, to have such a strong political dialogue in order to ease the sectarian tension. Yes, even today, I am in favor of high-level political dialogue, despite of the fact that in some countries, not because of Turkish foreign policy or because of our approach, but because of their inefficiency and incapacity to govern their societies, we have a big challenge to establish this high-level political dialogue. But whenever there is any chance, like Turkish-Iraqi relation, 2 weeks ago, Iraqi Prime Minister came to Turkey, and we had intergovernmental cabinet meeting co-chaired by 2 prime ministers after 3 years. This should be the way of relations. Yes, without establishing economic dependency to each other, it is difficult to have a peace. But unfortunately today, economic resources of the Middle East especially have been wasted not for economic development, but to continue for the totalitarian approaches of the regimes. Yes, we have to have multicultural societies, and these are the ideals. Turkish foreign policy in that sense, based on 2 pillars, let me say. One is human aspect, value dimension, and in value dimension, we have certain values to be achieved. Secondly, strategic dimension, which is stability. Let me come first to value dimension. And as an academician, I am well aware of the sometimes dichotomy between values and realities, ideals and realities. But at the end of the day, the responsibility of all statesmen, all the leaders, is to change the reality in order to create a normative value structure in international system. How can we change this reality? One human dimension of our foreign policy is humanitarian approach in international crisis situation, like what happened in Syria. Everybody was silent when Syrian regime was killing people. Turkey received 2 million refugees from Syria and Iraq in last 4 years. 1.7 million refugees came from Syria. This is human dimension. We cannot reject their wish to come to Turkey because of strategic reasons. If we forget the value dimension of foreign policy or any policy, we will lose the basic essence of politics. Now, when we declared open door policy for Syrian refugees, nobody was expecting so many millions people would be escaping Syria. But our position was clear. Before, we had external relations with Syria for high-level political dialogue, for economic interdependency, and for multiculturalism. But when Syrian regime started to attack innocent people and through air bombardment, Scud missiles, we had to make a choice. either value or a tactical coalition with the regime. Our decision was clear. We will never cooperate for any dictatorial regime in such a brutal way, killing their own people. Was it only value orientation? No. At the same time, throughout of Arab Spring, Turkey was consistent to support democratic demands of the people. And again, this value is so important. Without legitimacy, no country can have sustainable stability. But unfortunately, the democratic demands of the people of the Middle East were not supported enough by economically and politically by international community. I can give you an example of democratic transition in Eastern Europe. Eastern European democratic transition was successful because of the political support, economic support by EU. Financing democracies is something which is essential, and because of security umbrella by NATO, especially in Kosovo and Bosnian case. Unfortunately, in the Middle East, during this transformation, there was no such a support, economic or strategic support on the demands of the people of the Middle East. And yes, we had some problems with Egypt, for example, because of our principal orientation that we will never cooperate with a military coup d'etat. But when we look at the performance of some democratic countries, they were not able to say anything for the democratic transition in Egypt. So there is a need of a new value dimension for international relations, which we lost. We have to defend certain values, like economic justice. When there was a drought in Somalia in 2012, in 2011, and children, babies were killed in Somalia because of terrorism, as well as because of drought and absence of the basic needs of survival. Turkish Prime Minister, then Prime Minister Erdogan, as Minister of Foreign Affairs, myself, we went to Mogadishu with 2 airplanes. One is full of food, the other one is all leading personalities of Turkish society. And that was the first airplane landing Mogadishu after 20 years by an official leader. This is, yes, this is a value dimension. We don't have any national interest in Somalia. But the international community, unfortunately, forgot Somalia. I cannot forget when we reached with our families to Somalia, babies were dying because of not having one drop of water in front of us. And in 1 year, Turkey spent $200 million for reconstruction in Somalia. Not only Turkey as a government, but Turkish NGOs went there without any fear, some of them being killed. But today, if you go to Mogadishu, then for a hospital, all the hospitals, government offices are being built by either by Turkish government or by Turkish NGOs. There is only one functioning embassy for the last 3 years in Mogadishu, right at the center of the city. There are some other embassies functioning in the airport. There was a brutal attack by terrorists last year, and one security personnel was killed, and several were injured. But we said we will continue to be in Somalia. Just to give 3 examples, how to react. We are facing a big challenge. In 2007, nobody was anticipating a global crisis is coming in economic sense, which will affect all the societies. And also, there was, to be frank, we were never imagined a situation where 300,000 Syrians being killed And that person who killed them is still sitting, and even some countries are welcoming his stay in power. All crimes against humanity were committed in Syria. This is an indication of inability of United Nations system, and also a clear picture that we need to reform international system, international organizations. And today, this is the biggest challenge all of us we need to work. These values, human rights, refugees, democracy, helping to LDCs, least developed countries. These are normative base of a Turkish foreign policy, and we will never change our position. Many people may criticize us, but we will have open door policy for Syria, for Syrian people, because I wish all of you, or some of you at least, should visit refugee camps in Turkey. Until now, we spent $5 billion, just one day with the hope to realize that ideal Middle East. We will continue to work for that, but we will never accept any legitimacy for a regime which killed their citizens. In that sense, the second important principle is stability. Stability through democracy is the basic tool for the survival of the democratic regimes, as well as for long-term stability of the countries. Unfortunately, in that sense, this stability as a big challenge for all of us is still a major problem for the international community. What we have to do now is, first, there is a need of a new political framework, normative framework for international political order. If a UN system was not able to prevent such human crimes against humanity in Syria by the regime, as well as emergence of terrorist organizations, not only in the Middle East but everywhere, there is a need of a new approach. And in this new approach, the ideals, the human values, will be the base for stability. Stability cannot be achieved without addressing to these humanitarian issues. Turkish foreign policy, on one hand, trying to respond to these challenges which emerged out of all these geopolitical, security, economic, and socio-political earthquakes in the last 20 years, but at the same time, we'll try to have a new foreign policy approach in order to open the ways and instruments for stability and economic development. In the last 12 years, Turkish economy has grown 4 times, despite of economic crisis. In the last 12 years, Turkish democracy has been strengthened despite of this unstable neighborhood. And in the last 12 years, Turkish presence in international organizations has increased despite of the challenges and unstable situation. And that principles will continue to be followed in order to achieve a new regional sub-orders, sub-regional and regional orders around Turkey as the source of several instabilities in Balkans, in Middle East, in Caucasia, and also a very active role in international organizations. These big challenges are in front of us. In fact, today, I shared some of our concerns with Chancellor Angela Merkel, and we, as Turkey and Germany, we decided to have high-level strategic cooperation council mechanism as we have with some other countries, like Russia, like Greece, like Iraq, as I mentioned, intergovernmental meeting in every 2 years. Because for Turkey and Germany, as two forces, stabilizing force, despite of all these crises, need to work together. And on Balkans, Caucasia, Black Sea, and Middle East, we are ready to work not only with Germany, with EU, with all the international partners to have a new era. Otherwise, these geopolitical shifts, as well as the fragility of many states, many state structures, will be creating new challenges for international community. There is a need of a new political mechanism, an inclusive cultural approach, and a just economic order. This year, we will be chairing G20. And one of our main objectives in G20 is how to bring G20 with LDC's least developed countries in order to ease the gap, to make the differences of economic development and to understand each other. We will be, in G20 presidency, we will work on how to increase economic growth, because the world economy is declining, becoming much more tense, and that is creating many political problems. At the end of the day, what matters is how you bring all these parameters together in order to support your country's wish for stability, regional peace and stability, and international peace. Here, the key concept is inclusivity. We have to have an inclusive approach, consistency of political values and realities. These are the backbone of the challenges, as well as the backbone of the solutions to respond to this crisis. Turkish economy, Turkish politics, democracy, and Turkish foreign policy in that sense has been integrated in order to achieve these values within the context of international system, where there will be, in the future, there will be more challenges, but there will be need for more cooperation and stability. In this sense, maybe next meeting in Körber Foundation, we will be having a much better international context, international framework, but whatever happens, the responsibility of all of us, like the picture yesterday in Paris, we have to work together, shoulder to shoulder, and work efficiently against all these challenges of terrorism, brutal regimes, economic injustice, and the search for international peace and stability. Thank you very much.
Prime Minister, thank you very much for your speech. You have talked about the importance of values. Now, in December last year, when some journalists were arrested in Turkey, there came sharp criticism from some top European Union officials that this is not in accordance with European values. And your answer was, or part of your answer was that there's a dirty campaign against Turkey. My question is, why did you use such a strong language? And the other question, is this really a club you want to join, the European Union? Because as you well know, the European Union, it's part of its philosophy and its working that it becomes involved very heavily in the internal workings of members who aspire, or of countries which aspire to become members in the future.
First of all, I never use such a phrase. I don't know from where you get it.
A dirty campaign against Turkey.
Yes, there is a campaign against Turkey sometime, in last years, but it doesn't mean that we are not ready to listen criticism. For example, what I mean, just to give an example, in last events, there has been several campaigns as if Turkey is acting in a tolerant way to terrorist groups in Syria. And today there was a question in press conference as well. And regarding the terrorist attack in Paris, there were certain circles to connect this with some people who went through Turkey. But in fact, in reality, that was not true. Nobody can show us or give us any proof that Turkey has been tolerant to any terrorist activity in Syria, around Syria, or in the world. This we have clarified several times, but without giving full picture of the events. When Turkey had to face such a big refugee crisis, around 2 million people are in Turkey, we spent $5 billion, and we are trying to restore stability around us, but there were certain campaigns without making necessary analysis and real contacts in Turkey, without coming to refugee camps, without seeing our border and challenges, there has been heavy criticisms. Of course, we have responded to this. We were never against any criticism. We are ready to listen to criticism, any journalistic activity, any questions could be addressed. But if there were some targeted positions with prejudice, then we have to make a difference between these campaigns and real criticisms. Turkey will continue to adapt and follow European values of freedom of speech. Any criticism is welcomed, but at the same time, of course, all of us, we have to be very careful how to respond certain prejudices, misunderstandings, without making real effort to see the reality. In that sense, if you give me a clear answer, evidence on this subject, I can give you more detailed information, but there has been this type of campaigns without making correct references to the events on the ground.
Speaking of your relations with the European Union, on the weekend you said that the resistance in Europe or in the European Union against a potential Turkish membership has contributed to Islamophobia and to cultural tensions between Europe and Islam, or the West and Islam. The perception here was, I think with many people who read this in the media, that you somehow have established a link between what happened recently in Paris in some way and this resistance against the Turkish membership in the EU. Is this the way you meant this, or was that a misunderstanding?
I think it was misquoted. And that is another example how you can see the same, you can distract such a conclusion from my statement. My statement was clear. In a positive way, what I said was, the picture in Paris, all European leaders are together against terrorism, and there Turkey, as Prime Minister of Turkey, I walked with all the European leaders. That picture was a picture of hope for cultural harmony, tolerance, against terrorism, against any prejudices, against other cultures and religions. That picture was so clear. After that picture, I said, if Turkey was a member in EU, that picture in Paris would have been in Brussels, and it would be given a correct message to all Europeans that Muslims and Christians are together in Europe in a peaceful manner, and Turkish membership to EU for us is a big global peace project as well, that Muslims and Christians and Jews and all the religions can be together under the umbrella of European Union. That's what I meant. I didn't establish a negative connection. I established a positive connection that Turkish membership will contribute to religious peace, cultural peace, and that should be the attitude. But if Turkey, a secular, moderate country, has not been accepted to EU because of a cultural prejudice, that will give a negative message to European people as well as to the world that now continents are being divided and based on cultural and religious differences. This is a big danger. That's what I meant in a positive connotation. Again, I am saying, if Turkey is member of EU today, EU will be stronger. That will be a right message. That will be a strong message to the world that in our continent, Muslims and Christians have lived together in the past and will continue to live together on an equal base and with full understanding of peace and tolerance to each other. That was my message, not negative way.
Okay, thank you. I have one question from Twitter here, which comes from Daniel Gerlach, and he refers to your participation in Paris, in the march. And the question is, by taking part in yesterday's manifestation, the Prime Minister has declared that he is Charlie too. How free will the Turkish press be in 2015?
Turkish press is already free. That is what I meant, to make judgment without seeing the reality. I am sure that gentleman doesn't know how many Turkish newspapers are being circulated, how many millions of websites are already being functioning, and in that newspapers, how Turkish governments, including myself, President and our government, has been criticized heavily every day. So Turkish press is free, but I think there is a need of a much better understanding to each other. In 2015, there will be another election in Turkey. I invite, can I get the name? Please respond to
Daniel Gerlach. I think he's also a journalist.
Okay, I am inviting him to my political campaign in May. We will go to every city, and he will see how much Turkish democracy is vibrant, and I invite him. He can be my guest, special guest, but I will give him a homework to read Turkish newspapers every day and count articles which are in favor of government and which are against the government. He will be very much surprised that criticizing articles or news are much more than supporting our government. Therefore, judging Turkey from distance is easy approach, but not correct. So send him a tweet that I am expecting him in my public campaign, and he will see in one city our party will make campaign, in another city another opposition party, and everybody will speak whatever he or she wants. In Kurdish, in Turkish, secular, all type of arguments are there. It will be my pleasure to welcome him.
Okay, we will do that. You might I'm not sure whether he can read Turkish language, so you might have to give him a translator also.
No, yeah, I can give, but he will learn Turkish. He will learn. Once he learns Turkish, he will be better understanding of Turkey. Important is not the language itself. Important is the logic and the language of heart and brain. Before judging a country, it is better to know the details. That is what I meant when I said campaign. There are certain circles, for example, certain international media. When there was a demonstration in Turkey, they are live broadcasting by muscles as if they are in war. When there was not such a case, suddenly, as if they are reporting from Damascus, they are giving an impression. But if the same type of events are in Europe, it has been seen as normal. We are an open society. No journalist or no intellectual, no human being needs any special attitude to come to Turkey. I invite everybody to come to Turkey. Just stay a few days, then judge and criticize. I will accept. But without seeing the reality on the ground, judging and accusing a country is not European way. As Europeans, we have to be ready to any criticisms, but also criticism of criticism is right of us.
Let me ask you one more question on the regional issues in the Middle East. And then I would like to open the floor for your questions from the audience, from our participants. As you well know, the Hamas is considered a terrorist organization by the European Union. Now, you have received the political leader of Hamas, Meshal, in your hometown in Turkey recently. What can the role of Hamas be in the relations between Palestinians and Israel? Can it have a constructive role, because it has publicly declared many times that it is ready to fight Israel?
Yes, Khalid Meshal was in Konya two weeks ago, and today Mahmoud Abbas is in Ankara, right at this moment, having meeting with our president, and tomorrow I will have a meeting with him. First of all, we are friends. Turkey is a great friend of Palestinian people, and we'll have contacts with all Palestinian leaders. For us, Hamas is not a terrorist organization. Hamas never committed any terrorist activity anywhere. Even yesterday, Hamas has condemned this terrorist act in Paris in a very clear manner. If their lands were not occupied, Palestinians wouldn't have this need to have these organizations. But if you don't see the massacres, brutality committed by Israel, and those people who are resisting against this occupation, they have been accused as terrorists for many decades, and today we don't have peace in Middle East, we don't have peace in Palestine. Okay, I can tell you, if tomorrow Israel withdraw from Gaza and West Bank and from East Jerusalem, I think Hamas or other political organization of Palestine will continue to have their own way of politics without any other method to be used. But if your land is being occupied, you are being insulted every day, your children being killed and bombarded. I was in Gaza when Israel was bombarding Gaza in 2012. With 10 Arab ministers, we were in Gaza. And I saw the dead bodies of young ladies, the bodies of children. And you don't see this state terror, and you see those who are resisting this as terrorist organization. We don't accept this. What could be the role of Hamas? Whenever there is any conflict in Gaza, like last summer, many international leaders and countries and UN approached us to help. And we always tried to achieve ceasefire in this type of tense situation. Therefore, I gave the example of Israel-Syria peace process. We ran this process, and we had a huge effort with Prime Minister Ehud Olmert then, and with Bashar Assad. And I was mediating between two sides for 3 years almost, as chief advisor of Prime Minister Erdogan then. And when we were very close to a peace, at last moment, 2 days before the last agreement, Gaza was bombarded. Therefore, in order to understand the situation in Middle East, we have to understand and make empathy with Palestinians. Without solving Palestinian question, it is difficult to have a peace in the Middle East. And for that reason, we have to ask to Israeli side as well what they are planning to do for an ultimate peace. We are asking all of the questions to Palestinian side, to Hamas. What will you do in a constructive way? Now we need to ask to Israeli side what they are planning to do in the future. What will they do with the Palestinians under the occupation? How do they establish settlement every day? A Palestinian minister was killed during a protest. You asked so many questions to me about democracy. Yes, I am ready to answer any question. But did we ask the Israeli side how, on what basis did they kill a Palestinian minister of Mahmoud Abbas has been killed in a demonstration? Was there any question? Such a position against this murder. Here, important thing is to find a peace and comprehensive solution to Palestinian question. Without having such a clear position to have a Palestinian state, it is not ethical to criticize only Palestinian side and accuse them to be terrorists.
Okay. So we have some time for 2 or 3 questions from the audience. Who wants to start? We have 2 mics here in the room. Okay, Mr. Fischer.
Mr. Fischer.
Please wait for the mic.
Mr. Prime Minister, a very short question. Can you outline a little bit about the perspective of solving the Syrian crisis, because it's an unbelievable humanitarian disaster. If you look to the reality with ISIS on the one hand, Assad on the other hand, the weakness of the democratic opposition, the threat, the humanitarian threat. Are there any fresh ideas about solving the Syrian crisis, or is it an option to go back to the Annan plan and try to start again a kind of peace process with all the actors which are present there?
Yes. Thank you very much. I am so happy to see you again, Mr. Fischer. I think in Syrian crisis in 4 years, we had 3 phases. In the first phase, from January 2011, February 2011 until September 2011, let me say, when there was a rise of democratic demands in the region, and there were several peaceful demonstrations in Syria, parallel to Tahrir Square in Egypt and other places. During that time, we had good relations with Bashar al-Assad as Turkey, and he was our good neighbor and friend. Only Turkey tried to convince Bashar al-Assad not to use force against the people. I went to Syria 3 times at that time: January, April, and August. In every meeting, in last meeting, I stayed with him 7 hours in his room, 4 hours tete-a-tete discussion. We tried to convince him that he should go to election, if not at least make some reforms in order to include opposition and to satisfy these demands. And as Turkey, we told him, we will be supporting you economically, politically. If you go to election, Prime Minister Erdogan send a message, I will come and support. Just not to be, to use military against the people. But unfortunately, he didn't listen us. But more important, international community did not support this type of efforts. And he insisted to use army. Why this is important? Because unfortunately, in Syrian regime, 12% of the nation, of the society, is controlling 85% of all military intelligence. Second phase, when he decided to use army against the people, almost all, big majority of the people were alienated from the regime and started to have resistance against the attacks by Assad, by the army, by air bombardment and other means. At that stage, again, Turkey supported opposition this time, but there was no clear support by international community. When I say by international community, core group of friends of Syria, when moderate democratic opposition was strong enough to make a change. Other countries supported the regime heavily. I don't want to give the name of the countries, but you know. While democratic moderate opposition did not have enough support. Unfortunately, we lost an opportunity at the first phase to convince Bashar al-Assad. He was not able to be convinced. Second stage, there was not enough support to opposition to make a change. Then the third stage came. Moderate opposition has been targeted by a regime and by Daesh and terrorist groups at the same time, and these moderate forces became weaker and weaker. Now we are in third phase, unfortunately. If there was the red line, which was declared regarding chemical weapons, was respected, and the Syrian regime, a strong signal was given to Syrian regime, in that sense, we wouldn't face Daesh, ISIS, or other type of organizations at early stage. When there was a vacuum, and when the hope for a transition was lost by the people, the radical movements and terrorist organizations gained ground. The last opportunity was last year, February, Geneva II talks. In that talks, unfortunately, there was not enough pressure on Syrian regime to talk on a political transition, which was a meaningful text that a new transition government will be established based on mutual consent. But Syrian regime didn't accept this, and we lost that opportunity as well. What could be done? Unfortunately, today, we have a terrorist threat, but at the same time, we have a brutal regime which is ready to kill as many as people. Can you imagine half of the people of Syria are now IDPs? 10 million IDP. You can compare. It means 40 million of Turkish population are IDPs. Is that sustainable? And 6 million, which means almost 20-25% of the population are refugees outside. You can imagine 20 million Germans, God forsake, will be refugees. This is a big tragedy. Unfortunately, still, international community does not understand this in full sense. What is peace in Syria? One day, if there is a new political situation where refugees decide to go back, then we can be sure of a stable future. For this, who is responsible? I don't want to blame to any side, but P5 and internal conflicts of P5 is the main reason of inability acting against Syrian regime and acting against ISIS today. And therefore, I am telling that there is a need of a reformation of UN system. When two countries, even one country, decides to block any action, any dictator can kill as many as people, there will be no response. This is what we learned from Syrian crisis or from Palestinian crisis. Either this country or the other country blocks and any process stops. What we need today is an integrated strategy for the future of Syria. Integrated strategy means to fight against international terrorism, to prevent foreign fighters, but at the same time to make pressure on Syrian regime for a real political transition and political change which will lead to an inclusive government by all moderate forces, including opposition and maybe also including some from the system, political system, who did not commit crimes against humanity. Is it possible? It is more difficult than last year. Last year it was more difficult than the previous year. But today we have to decide and act very firmly. Otherwise, this Syrian crisis will not be Syrian crisis only, but will be crisis of humanity for many years in the future, unfortunately.
One more question here. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Bassam Abdullah. I am the ambassador of the Syrian National Coalition here in Germany. Mr. Prime Minister, I would like, in my name and in the name of Syrian Coalition and in the name of Syrian refugees in Turkey and everywhere, and in the name of the majority of Syrian people, to thank you and your government and your land and your people for these opening doors politic for the Syrian people. The Syrian people need more and more. Please keep this politic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Don't worry. from the first day of of this crisis, we declared that our doors will be open for all Syrians, regardless of ethnic or sectarian background, because not our door, but our heart is open for Syrians and for all those victims of this type of brutality. Before, in 1990s, 500,000 Kurds escaped from Saddam and came to Turkey. Hundreds of thousands of Bosniaks escaped from Milosevic and from Kosovo came to Turkey. Turkey has been the harbor of all victims of this type of brutalities, especially Syrian people. Our border with Syria is not a wall. The opposite. Villages are being divided. All of Syrians are our relatives, and whatever and whoever does anything, Turkey will be always with Syrian people. Most welcome.
Norbert Röttgen is next.
My name is Norbert Röttgen. I'm the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the German Parliament. Mr. Prime Minister, you gave a description of the situation in Syria and the region. And listening to this description, I would like to add the question, how would you describe the possible role of Turkey to constructively engage in this situation in order to resolve the situation? Because I'm convinced that there are very, very few countries who could play a key role in resolving the situation, and Turkey is among these very, very few countries who could play even more constructive role in resolving, given the fact that Turkey is a Muslim country, Turkey is a member of NATO, so you would face a lot of problems. You are involved in the Kurdish question, you are fighting Assad and ISIS. Could you please describe the possibilities of a constructive key role of your country in this disastrous situation?
Thank you. Before Arab Spring, when I spoke in 2007, we had reliable counterparts in the region, and our hope was to create a new regional order based on political dialogue, economic interdependency, multicultural coexistence, and a security framework, as it has been described. But after Arab Spring, when it started, our hope and our vision was to have a democratic transition in these countries, in Egypt, in Syria, in Tunisia, so that this democratic stability will create new hope for young generations. But unfortunately, after the brutality of Syrian regime and coup d'etat in Egypt, instead of democratic transition, there has been a going back for more authoritarian regimes. And as I said, these democratic groups and trends were not being supported. Now, what we are doing is, if there is any positive change, we support, like our relation with Iraq. Last year, we had difficulties with Maliki, Prime Minister Maliki, because of his sectarian policies, which led Mosul people or others being isolated and excluded, and Daesh or ISIS, they misused this situation. We tried to help Iraq, but they didn't listen our advice and others' advices. But now when Abadi came, we immediately declared, and we spoke with all the Sunni, Kurdish, Turkoman, Shiite leaders in order to support this new situation in Iraq. I went to Baghdad and Erbil in order to ease their tensions in November, and Abadi came to Turkey, and we have high-level strategic cooperation council mechanism. We are very hopeful, and we will do everything possible for the stability of Iraq and for a multi-sectarian character of the political system. And I am more optimistic than before because all important leaders now are in governmental structure. But still, they are not able to control, of course, a significant part of the country. Here, the positive role of Turkey is that we have excellent relations with all the leaders in Iraq, and we helped a lot during the formation of the government. And several times, we spoke with the leaders in order to help the process, and whenever we have a reliable partner, we will support. And this will be constructive role. And we called all Turkish companies to go back to Iraq for reconstruction. Another important case is Tunisia. Tunisia is a success story, maybe the only success story in our hand now. During electoral process and afterwards, we have spoken with all Tunisian leaders. They are all our friends. And we have spoken with many other friends around the world to support Tunisian case. Whoever wins the election is not important, secular or more conservative, more liberal. At the end of the day, important thing at this moment in the region is the survival of an elected, democratically elected leader or government. We never supported any group against the other one. But in Tunisia, again, we support. What else Turkey can do? Refugee, humanitarian-wise, now whoever has any problem in the region comes to Turkey because Turkey is a safe haven for many of them. We will continue to have this humanitarian policy to support refugees and other people who are being affected negatively by all these developments. We will have excellent relations whenever there is any transition, like I said, in Iraq and Tunisia, and in other countries. We will work with international community to fight against terrorism, like what we are doing today, and also to establish a base for a peaceful transition and solving questions through peaceful negotiations and talks. Thank you very much for your appreciation of Turkish role. But if there is no international consensus, only Turkish effort will not be helpful. We did everything possible in the past. We had several mechanisms. In 2010, we were having, we were almost finished to an agreement between Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan, four-party, visa-free, trade-free zone. This is visionary approach. But at the same time, of course, all these negative developments and crises should be contained. Despite of the difficulties, I think in the future there will be also some opportunities for a much more stable and democratically elected governments to function in the region.
Prime Minister, our time is nearly over, so allow me one last question and a short answer, and to turn our focus away from the Middle East and to Eastern Europe. There is, as you know, a huge conflict between the European Union and the United States on the one side and Russia on the other side about the annexation of Crimea and the situation in eastern Ukraine. Where's Turkey in this conflict?
Our position is very clear. We did not recognize annexation of Crimea. We will not recognize. We are in all statements, we declare that we are supporting territorial integrity of Ukraine, and that territorial integrity, including Crimea, should be preserved. And from the early days of the crisis, we had good relations with both sides. Turkey is the only European country neighbor to Russia and Ukraine at the same time, European Union country, and have direct access to Crimea. We have historic ties in Crimea with Crimean Tatars. Therefore, we have certain historic responsibilities because we have, as I said, 100 millions of Tatar origin people living in Turkey escaped from Russia from 19th century until now. And 300,000 Crimean Tatars are still in Crimea. Their welfare is important for us. And Crimea as integral part of Ukraine is our main policy. But at the same time with Russia, we have very good relations, and we will keep that relation as two neighbors without changing our position on Ukraine. And whatever we can do, we will help. Today, the special mission of OSCE, the chairman of the special mission is a Turkish diplomat having good relation with everybody on the ground. We will support Ukrainian government, and we will do everything possible to find a solution between two sides if there is any need of Turkish mediation. Thank you.
Prime Minister, let me again thank you very much for being with us, for accepting our invitation and engaging in this discussion. I hope that we have time at some other time to continue this. I would like to thank our audience to be with us here today, and as always, we invite you to participate in a small reception afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.